Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is an elderberry herbal tea from McNulty's, which is supposed to be good for respiratory things, I think. And I've had a pretty bad cold recently. It wasn't COVID, but it was, a bit of a rough time. So I thought elderberry might be helpful for that, but I also was feeling a bit warm today for reasons, and I decided to have it iced. This is a mug I got from a couple of friends recently, in a lovely gift box. So I thought it was cute, the audacity. It was a box of fun little things made by like a women run business or something like that. And it also came with some teas, which I'll have to show you guys at some point. But anyway, that's kind of the explanation for why I've been a little quiet lately. But one of the reasons is because I haven't been finishing a lot of books recently. I finished some, but I haven't been finishing enough to make a full-on video. And I thought, oh, so what am I going to talk about? I am reading books. I am constantly reading books, but I'm just not finishing a lot. One of the reasons I do that is because I'm reading a whole bunch of books at the same time. Some may say, that's not a good habit, Catherine. Finish. Stop being all over the place. But then I thought that might be a good subject for my video, which is basically what I like to be always reading. I don't know if that's going to be my title. I think it's just going to be something like what I'm always reading or something, or what I'm currently reading, or what I'm ideally currently reading or something. Mainly, if I could, it's like I always compare food, books and food. If I could, these are the kind of books that I would always have going on in the middle of. Doesn't mean that I'm always reading every single one of these books. I've written down at least 6 different types of books, and sometimes when I look at what I'm currently reading, one or two of these are missing, and that's fine too. Just ideally, what feels good for me to have open at all times to be able to go to, depending on mood, depending on what I'm just that day reading. That's all. And there are some things I left out. Like, for instance, mystery novels. I love mystery novels, but I don't have to keep one going all the time. Certain times a year, they're just not something I'm in the mood for. But it's a good honorary mention. Same thing applies to, I think, nature writing, which actually I wanted to read again in May because there's another, reading challenge about reading nature writing. I might, but it's not something I necessarily tie myself to all year. It's just a thing I like. And also, I guess you could say tea books. I love to read books about tea. I have a lot of books about tea, some of which I haven't read at all, and some of which I just haven't reread in a long time. So it would be nice to have that. It would be nice to have that. But these are not like absolute necessities. Neither are these 6 others, but they're just. Need I say more? So let's get into what I would like to be always reading, and I will show a couple of examples of what I'm currently reading, or might be finishing soon, or what have you. And the first 2 are authors that I like to be always reading. There are other authors that I also wouldn't mind to have going all the time, but they're not as necessary. But these 2 are the tops, and if you've been watching my videos in the past couple of years, you will say, oh yeah, these make total sense. And in by the way, no particular order here. Not like, oh, well, this is the best because she's mentioning it first, but it's close. And that is Anthony Trollope. You can see I'm almost finished with He Knew He Was Right. And you might say, I know I always say this, but people might say, and they probably won't, but they might say, hey, if you love Anthony Trollope so much, why does it take you so long to read his books? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, because again, I will always refer to that one October where I read Can You Forgive Her, which is a pretty big book. It's probably bigger than this one, and I read it in like 2 weeks. So it depends on what else I'm reading. And also, Anthony Trollope, much as there are, I think, 47 books of his, and I have a ways to go before I've read all of them, or even close to all of them, I don't have this rush that I need to catch up to anybody else. It would be nice to have read, I would say, half of his body of work by the time I'm 50, which doesn't give me that much time, actually. But there's no major, goal for me. Reason why I like to be reading Anthony Trollope constantly is because I just love his prose. I think he is hilarious most of the time, and even when he's writing about serious stuff, like in this book, a lot of serious bits. There's always maybe a chapter where it's a little too much, and then it goes right into something a little more lighthearted. And it's not that he is in denial of, the human condition or whatever, but he doesn't dwell too long on really sad things, which is good because I don't prefer that usually. Speaking of people who don't want to dwell on sad things too long, the second person, the second category is Jane Austen, because she is up there, and she's more of a challenge to be constantly reading or to be always having a Jane Austen going. I would say also with her, and this could count for Anthony Trollope, but especially for Jane Austen, it doesn't necessarily have to be one of her novels. It could be a book about Jane Austen or something related to her. And of course, I read more in July because of Jane Austen July. It's a wonderful time. But I've been finding that in the past couple of years, when I restrict myself too much to the summer, even if it's an enjoyable summer of reading Jane Austen, I feel like I'm missing out. In a cold day of February, I want to be reading something of hers. So this means that I would like to just slowly go through, and she's, written very few novels compared to Anthony Trollope, so it's much more of a challenge. But I figure I could slowly go through her books every year. Maybe not read every single one of her novels every year, but I could go through a chunk of them if I want to. And that feels good. Just the thought of it to me feels good, that I will have more Jane Austen going every year because I am a big fan. I named my cat after her, for goodness sakes. I haven't named a cat after Anthony Trollope yet. I don't know how I would, because why? But anyway, it's just not that kind of name. If you have any ideas of a feline version of Anthony Trollope, suggestions are welcome, but I'm not adopting a new cat anytime soon. Excuse me for that weird sound. Or so I say. I made such a not fun little sound. I hate that. I try not to make noises. But anyway, let's not dwell. Did I mention let's not dwell? So I am currently reading, slowly but surely, the annotated Sense and Sensibility, which is a great way of rereading, because it explains phrases and things that maybe I wouldn't have picked up on my first couple of readings, some of which I knew stuff about already, but it is helpful. I wouldn't recommend it for a first read, but it gets you into that world and into the language in ways that are great, because it's not too analytical. It's not too, things that are like I don't need to spend time on, but it's just great. I've been enjoying it in a way that is slightly nerdy, but not too scholarly, if that makes sense. So, good times. I don't know which one I'm going to read after this one, but that's okay. There's no rush. And I do like Sense and Sensibility, and it's a good one. It's a good one to read slowly and just to live with for a while, Okay. The next category is one that I just recently finished some books on, and now I really need to get something started. Actually, I probably have some things that I am in the middle of, just haven't picked up in a while. Nevertheless, it is history. So I like to read history or historical biography, which to me is basically the same thing. And because I do like to read sometimes about a person that lived in a certain time period, and that helps you to get to know that time period, for instance. I do focus mostly on English history, British history, slightly European history, occasionally American history, and all the rest are very occasional. And I know that's a little narrow, but my excuse, of course, is that when you're reading, for instance, British history, you do get to a point, just because they were very into empire and colonial stuff, which, I have my own opinions on. Nevertheless, it did affect a lot of countries, so you do learn about other countries. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but I have, just pulling in the tea books that I talked about, I have by default read a little more, excuse me, coughing all the time, about history of different parts of the world, of the tea growing parts of the world, that just tied in a little bit. And so I do read other histories, but you know what? Everybody's got to have a focus. So though I will veer here and there, I tend to really focus on English history. And the biographies I tend to focus on tend to be, not always, but tend to be monarchs or someone close to a monarch. Recently, I'm going to have to do a wrap up at some point of the books I've read recently, but recently I read a biography on Richard III. It wasn't the best biography, but that is a whole other discussion. I just finished a biography on, I just hit myself in the head, on Henrietta Maria by Leandra Delisle, who, if you don't know who Henrietta Maria was, she was a queen. She was the wife of Charles I, the king, the Stuart King of England, who was beheaded, executed, and people have often blamed her for the events that led up to that. And this really explains that it kind of wasn't her. It was just a lot of things that she was just kind of a scapegoat, but she was also, I mean, slightly, some of her actions had some bearing, but not usually direct. Anyway, it is a book I would recommend, but I'll talk about that possibly another time. So yes, I like to have these going, and I'm raring to start a new one any day now. Just trying to finish up a couple other books, but I just look forward to reading my history books so much. Makes me so happy. And then of course another topic, and this is mainly nonfiction, but it can encompass some fiction, and that is books about books. I, well before I was into BookTube, although I'm so glad to have discovered and become a part of BookTube, well before that, and well before even internet, even before I was really in any kind of bookish internet at all, websites or whatever, I was reading books about books, because that was the way to, besides reading book reviews or occasionally talking to other people who read books, this was the way to discuss books. And I never stopped liking that. And there's so many different types of books about books. For instance, like I said, some fiction, which could be a fictional account of a bookseller, a bookshop, a writer, etc. So, and that kind of ties into something else I'm going to talk about later. But that is always great too. And I usually have something like that going. I tend to have lately, for some reason, even though I'm not as into World War II fiction as some people are, I tend to find myself having like books about something, a bookish fictional book about, something during World War II with the back of a woman on the cover and books. And no regrets, because they're usually pretty good books, actually. So that's examples, but yes, nonfiction too. Again, I like reading author biographies a lot. I have an Anthony Trollope biography that I'm itching to start. I've just been not having done so. Recently, I finished a book about Agatha Christie, and I have this book at the library that I haven't really read much of yet. I'm thinking about starting it this week, but we'll see. That is by Emma Smith, Portable Magic, History of Books and Their Readers. So, am I in there because I'm a reader? Am I part of history? I don't know. So it's actually a history too. So it like I said, some of these things come together. Like I said, if I read a biography on Anthony Trollope, it's a book about books, it's a book about Anthony Trollope, so it's related to my Anthony Trollope interests. Same thing with Jane Austen. You know what I mean? So sometimes I can have 3 books going and they encompass. Okay. And then I have another subject that I know I don't talk about as much as I had intended to on this channel, but I intend to keep talking about it a little bit. And that is a project that I have ongoing. It's not like I'm obsessing over it, but it is related to things that I'm interested in. So yeah. And that is, I say I used to, but I still can call it my Poets and Pre-Raphaelites project, which means that I'm into the Pre-Raphaelite. I don't know. I still don't know if I pronounced that correctly after all these years, but I don't care. That's how I say it. Pre-Raphaelite. Which was a movement of artists in Victorian England, specifically London, and then moving on to like Oxford and other places, and then it moved on and inspired people to do similar types of art in the United States and Europe and elsewhere, and it's gone in and out of popularity, but even at the time it inspired things, and it was inspired by other things such as poetry, hence the Poets and Pre-Raphaelites, Shakespeare, history, medieval history, biblical, etc. And it really does combine a lot of my interests anyway. History does figure into that. But when I'm really focusing on Pre-Raphaelite, part of it, I usually like to have a specific book about them going. Sometimes it can be fiction, but often it can be nonfiction. Here's a book I'm slowly working my way through, and it's pretty good so far. It's Pre-Raphaelites in Love by Gay Daly. I have the cover, I usually take the covers off of these books because they flop around when I'm trying to read them. So, but I like the side of it. It's rather pretty. And yeah, it's a very familiar subject for me, but there's things that I always forget. And a lot of Victorian authors are somehow entwined. Dickens, whether he likes it or not. Anthony Trollope, even, because one of my favorite of these artists, John Everett Millay, he illustrated some books of Anthony Trollope's, which I love these connections. I just love these connections. I don't know if you guys do, if I'm just being overly nerdy, but I love these connections. And then the next one, it's like I said, it does really tie in to all of these things, but I just thought I'd make it its own separate category, and it's the last one I'm going to mention. And of course, I'm sure you're going to say, but don't you talk about this book a lot and that book a lot, and this doesn't really fit in? I'm like, you know what? Can't have everything. I mean, like, I would love to have tons of Victorian novels going at the same time beyond Anthony Trollope, etc. And it's never going to happen that I'm going to have it all. So I'm just trying to keep it narrow. And this is as narrow as I can make it. Do I need to explain myself? And that is historical fiction. And so, like I mentioned, I was talking about those books, those novels where you see the back of the woman in World War II. That really does fall under historical fiction. I've read biographical novels about, like I said, about authors. I've read biographical novels about the Pre-Raphaelites and their people, like the people who were related to them, like Elizabeth Siddal, who was with Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So it's all kind of connected too, but then sometimes I'll read historical fiction about Tudor times, actually a lot about Tudor times. That's probably my main focus, but sometimes I'll read one about Queen Victoria, or even occasionally I'll go as far back as Roman times. I didn't even mention that sometimes I get into ancient history when I'm talking about history books of nonfiction, but also historical fiction. Every once in a while, I'll read an I Claudius or something. And I thoroughly enjoy it because I am a big fan of history. But I was also drawn into it mostly by reading historical fiction, and enjoying the stories and wanting to know more thereby deciding to get into the actual nonfiction of it to know what's the real story, and what's real, what was made up, etc. And so these all do come together, and I just love historical fiction. Some of it is rubbish. Some of it is like, wow, this really didn't happen, and how could they, the audacity, but often it can be really fascinating. And even slightly bad historical fiction, the writers have had to do a lot of research and a lot of work into it before they can get it published. So it's all together, yeah. So that's basically it. And it would be nice if I could remember when I'm talking about books in the future to kind of tie it into these notes and say, hey, this goes, this fits into number 1 and this fits into number 5. But I don't know if I'll always do that. But hey, if you feel like pointing it out when I make future videos, you are totally allowed to do that as well. I welcome it. But I am leaving it up to you now. What are the kind of books that you like to see me reading? What are the kind of books that you like to have going at all times? Do you have specific authors that you have almost like a diet plan? This is what you always want to be reading. Do you have certain subjects that you don't like to put down, so you want to have it open? Or are you a one book at a time kind of person, and even if you like to have certain categories, you stick to one book at a time? I'm interested in your reading habits as well. And so that is all for now. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. It's I don't mean it to be filler, because I haven't read as much as I would like to, or at least finished as much as I would have liked to. But it is, I am talking about reading, so that is what we're here for, right? And so that is all for now. Have a lovely, until next time. Uh, this is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely condensation. Have a lovely tea and bookville day.